Sweet. Well, hi everyone. Thanks for being here and joining us today for a Friends from the Field webinar. My name is Maren Brock and I am the Outreach Coordinator for Blue Hill Heritage Trust. And these webinars are co-hosted with Island Heritage Trust. So we also have Noel on the panel from Island Heritage Trust. And we've been doing these webinars for a few years now. And if you're interested in looking at past webinar archives or like other talks we've done, then you can find those on our website or on our YouTube channel, which is just look up Blue Hill Heritage Trust on YouTube. All of our webinars and online resources are free and open to the public, and every person, no matter what, is welcome to attend these sessions and take advantage of these resources. So if you appreciate the work we do and are interested in making a donation or contributing to our work, then you can donate on our website. And if you are already a donor, then thank you for your support. So now I'm going to pass it over to Noel to talk about some housekeeping and questions, and then I will introduce our speaker, Michael.
Hey everyone, thanks for being here. My name is Noelle Ruth. I am the Outreach Manager for Island Heritage Trust. So for tonight's presentation with Michael, please do bring any curiosities, questions, thoughts for Michael, and feel free to put those in the chat box anytime during his presentation. And then Maren and I will read them to Michael at the very end of the presentation.
Sweet. Thank you, Noel. So our expert today is Michael Galli, who works with the Maine Forest Tick Survey. He is a research assistant at the University of Maine, and he is leading the field work for a regional collaborative study of tick ecology and management on residential properties, which sounds fascinating. I also wanted to mention that today we're going to be focusing on tick ecology and management, and we're not going to be discussing treatment options for tick illnesses because that's a whole other conversation and topic that we won't have time or expertise for today. So thank you very much, and I hope you enjoy. And now I'm going to hand over to Michael.
Right. Can everyone see that okay?
Yes, we can see it.
All right. So, like everyone said, I'm Michael Galli. I'm coming to you from UMaine, and we're going to be talking about what I did 2 years ago, which is the Maine Forest Tick Survey, it has ended now. And we're still sort of combing through what we found from it, but this is going to involve a lot of the really big stuff that we found. And the tick survey is really interesting, but I think it would help everyone if we got a little bit of a baseline of our local ticks. So I think everyone's probably going to have a good idea of the two on the left, the black-legged tick. Sometimes it's called the deer tick. Both common names are acceptable. Black-legged gets used across the country, so if you read anything from either out west or down south, sometimes they'll get called the black-legged tick. It's a deer tick, it's the same thing. And the dog tick. Now, these two get a really bad rap for good reason. They're both pretty notorious for carrying some pretty rough diseases. Lyme disease is the one I think we're all most familiar with that the black-legged tick carries. Though out of this list, it also carries powassan, which I haven't heard that many reports of in Maine, though it's a very debilitating disease to catch. It's really one of the ones that'll completely knock you out. I'm not a doctor. I can't give you too much information on it other than you don't want it. The American dog tick usually gets kind of thought of as the tick that's better to get bit by. It doesn't carry as many diseases, and the diseases it does carry, we haven't seen very much in Maine. Rocky Mountain spotted fever is probably the one that is most connected to the American dog tick, but that isn't particularly common in Maine, though it's pretty common in other parts of the country. So if you travel outside the state, it's something to watch out for. The third one's the woodchuck tick. It's probably the least common. I don't know anyone who's been bit by one. We didn't collect any this summer. We haven't collected any, as far as I'm aware. They're out there. They're really another southern Maine and almost more into like New Hampshire kind of staple. So they're not super common, but if you're traveling or if you're in a trail that a lot of people travel to, you might encounter them. They're another Powassan carrier. Um, they're really not what the Maine Forest Tick Survey was interested in, but they are in Maine, so it's good to keep them in mind. Now, these ticks get a bad rap for really good reason, but ticks in general aren't actually only a problem for us. There are over 11 tick species in Maine that just don't bite humans. Any deer hunters will be pretty familiar with winter tick, which attaches itself to deer and moose, but not usually people unless it really has to. And the other common one is rabbit ticks, which are a veterinary pest. You'll find them on your dogs or your cats if you let them outside. Now, their habitat and life cycle means that these won't bite people. You shouldn't ever be bitten one of these, but they're still important for scientific research because they can carry the same diseases. Rabbit tick, especially, will carry Lyme disease. It's how a lot of household pets will get Lyme disease is through rabbit tick bites. And because people aren't used to seeing them, they'll tend to miss them, and people's pets will get Lyme disease through them. And besides our local tick population, we're also dealing with a newcomer to the state. The Lone Star tick has gotten a lot of press activity, and it's not really, it is for a good reason. It's a tick from the south that normally attaches to white-tailed deer, but as I will be explaining later, anything that attaches to white-tailed deer really likes to attach to us too. They really can't tell the difference between us and a deer. And they've been mostly in the news because they carry alpha-gal, which is the virus that gives you an allergy to red meat. They've been reported in southern and mid-coast Maine, and they're not that common. I'd still be more worried about getting Lyme disease, but they're definitely increasing in population. And the other one that's gotten some pretty significant news coverage is the Asian longhorn tick. Now, we haven't found this one yet, but it's really new. It's only been seen since 2017. And even though we haven't found it carrying any diseases, we're still pretty concerned about it because it bites people and it can reproduce without mating, which means that even if only a few end up making their way to Maine, either through travel or they'll attach to people or their horses as they travel back and forth between New England and other states, that means that because they can reproduce without mating, even a single tick could become a few, which could become a much larger issue. So those are the ones that we're looking out for. We haven't been collecting them and we haven't seen them, which is a good sign, but things might change in the future. So now that we've met our local ticks, onto our tick survey, which we were mostly interested in the black-legged tick or the deer tick here. They're the one that usually causes anyone to become infected with a tick-borne disease, and Lyme disease is very common and it is very debilitating, especially to younger children or older people. And we were really interested in seeing if we could find a relationship between how forests are managed and how loggers do their work and how tick-borne diseases how prevalent tick-borne diseases are. We also wanted to try and help landowners understand the risk that comes with tick-borne disease and how they can help deal with it. And we wanted to come up with a list of recommendations to be able to basically hand over and have pretty good and solid and repeatable advice for all landowners. Now, the reason we're so focused on landowners is that well, Lyme disease is becoming much, much more common in Maine and across the country, especially. Now, I know Massachusetts is blanked out here. That's because Massachusetts has a different reporting style, so we don't have data on them right now. But over the past 18 years, Lyme disease has exploded. It's ended up farther north and in much higher densities than we've ever seen it before. So it's not just a problem, it's a growing problem. And it's one that affects a large amount of Maine's industries. It affects tourists, it affects loggers, it affects sportsmen, which are all groups of people that we'd really like to keep safe in the state. And we were really focused on the relationship between ticks, their habitats, and their prey, I guess you'd call them. You see, I know this flow chart is a little intimidating, but we're just going to go through it slowly from left to right. And the idea behind this is that if we can change how we manage our forests, we can focus on micro habitat features and wildlife communities. And the microhabitat features we'd really, really like to take care of is temperature, humidity, and leaf cover. And the wildlife that we'd like to focus on are white-footed mice and white-tailed deer. And between these two, we think that if we can get a handle on how these affect each other, we could lower both tick abundance and how often those ticks have diseases like Lyme disease, which would not only mean that you're getting bit by less ticks, it would also mean that if you do get bit by a tick, it would decrease the chance that that tick is infected with anything. And that was kind of the big focus of this study, is seeing how we could affect microhabitats and what management strategies best changed those habitat features and best changed those wildlife communities to help reduce people's exposure to tick-based diseases. Now, the black-legged tick is really connected. This is why we're so interested. This image on the left is their life cycle. It takes about 2 years to complete. And the big focus on it, and the part that really is where we can intervene and reduce their numbers, are at the nymph stage and at the adult stage. At the nymph stage, they'll attach to people and animals, and they'll infect you just as much as the adults will. But as nymphs and larvae, they also focus on small mammals, especially mice. And as adults and nymphs, they'll focus on large animals like us and deer. Both are really important, not only for the tick to grow up, take blood meals, and become an adult, but also as mice and deer get infected with Lyme disease, they'll act as pockets of disease that the ticks can that clean ticks will then feed from, become infected with Lyme disease, and then when they bite you, they'll give you Lyme disease. And this is where the real habitat part of it focuses in. Things like leaf cover, brush cover are all home to these small mammals and become home to ticks when they drop off of these small mammals and try and become adults, where they'll go to bite us or deer. And the deer population will feed back into this, being either reservoirs for Lyme disease or just a chance for ticks to become adults. So we've identified our problem, we know what we want to do, and now we really need to figure out where we should look. And this actually lines up pretty easily for us. You see, a ton of the forests in Maine are held by private landowners, and a ton of the forests in southern Maine are not really considered industrial. They're not owned by massive corporations. They're owned by families or small businesses. And this lines up pretty well with where we're seeing Lyme disease cases increasing. This is why we want to focus on foresters. These are smaller companies and smaller groups of people that we think will actually take our recommendations, and hopefully will make our recommendations so much more effective once we offer them. And we did this in 2 ways. First of all, we want to understand the people we were dealing with. This is a scientific issue, but just as much of it is a people issue. We wanted to, first of all, know why people cared about ticks in general, and we wanted to know what people were doing and what they cared about. We wanted to know if people were, say, avoiding their backyards completely or avoiding their forested property completely if they were afraid of ticks. We wanted to know what precautions people were taking and if they were managing their homes in any way to try and prevent ticks. And we also needed some ticks to test. So we got a bunch of volunteers for drag cloth surveillance, which I'll explain in a second. And we did this both on people's private properties, houses, small plots of land, but we also did it in larger managed forests. Specifically, we focused on the Fry Mountain, which is a forest that is has a lot of different management practices going into it and is really heavily managed. And it's one that we thought we'd get a lot of different management strategies, everything from really specific focused cuts where they only cut one or two trees to complete clear cuts. So it gave us a wide variety of different forestry styles to look at. So we had our wonderful volunteers, and we really got a lot of them. We allowed anyone with any land between 5 and 1,000 acres to help us participate in tick collection, and people came out in droves. In 2020, we got 125 people to help us, and in 2021, most of those people came back, and we found a few extras along the way, with almost 200 people helping us drag and pick out ticks. It was honestly a ton of fun. The logistics of it are, I'm not going to lie, nightmarish to deal with, but it really was all worth it just to see all those people out there helping us collect ticks. And how we did it was actually pretty pretty basic. First, we asked them all a series of questions. If you'd like to pause and sort of look through it, I'll give you a minute to. But the real takeaway for me was that most people volunteered and wanted to help us just because they were interested in ticks. And people understood that there were risks associated with ticks and they wanted to understand them. It's really good to see results like this. It lets us know that people are coming out because they want to, and it's much better than the alternative, which would be people coming out just because they're terrified. A huge part of this is just that we want people to use their land and to feel safe on it. And hearing so many people be interested in ticks, I mean, it makes us feel warm and fuzzy, but it also helps because it means that these people are interested in our advice once we understand the situation and might be willing to change how they act once we start talking to them about it and once we start learning. Though there was a little bit of, I guess, strangeness. Um, these two graphs are they're a little confusing, so I sort of despise them, but I haven't gotten to rework them yet. Um, the issue we were finding was that a lot of people really, both years, really understood that they were concerned about Lyme disease. They were worried about tick-borne diseases, and that it meant something to them. But they weren't really doing much about it. They especially weren't avoiding any areas on their property. And this is something that we saw in a lot of other cases. People were worried about Lyme disease, but they weren't really doing anything about it. They were just kind of abstractly being concerned, which on the one hand, it's a little concerning. We'd like people to take action and do things to avoid Lyme disease, but to us, it also seems like maybe if people weren't doing anything, they just didn't feel like they had the tools to meaningfully avoid Lyme disease, which is part of what this process is all about. So it's a strange disconnect, but I think it shows us that our research is needed and that people will listen once we actually provide them with some resources based on our research. Though collecting the ticks, and our volunteers were great about this, was done on pretty much a shoestring budget. When you're trying to supply this many people, it's nice to keep things simple. And really, everything here was mostly just printouts. Everyone got sort of a guide sheet, what to do, when to drag. They were asked to drag 3 times over the summer, They looked for any invasive plants, as there's some theory that tick population is related to invasive plants. And they collected using the drag cloth, which is a really common way of collecting ticks. It's been used in pretty much every state in almost every scenario. And it's just this white cloth you see on the upper left-hand corner. It's basically just a large piece of um, like flannel material. Sorry, I couldn't remember the name. That's held down by a couple of fishing weights. And to us, just looks like a big white sheet. But to a tick, when they feel it get dragged along the ground, to them, it feels the same as the stomach of a dog or a deer or the ankles of an animal. And they're not particularly bright. So they just latch onto it and won't let go. The white sheet makes it really easy to spot them. So we just take them, spot them, pluck them off, and we put them in vials of alcohol. That kills the ticks and it also saves them so that we can test them for diseases. And that's really the methodology we used for collecting ticks. It was just 5 or 10 people outside in the woods, just dragging these cloths behind them. You'd have to drag it like we usually describe it to people as a wedding march pace. You have to go very slow and you just check it every 30 seconds or so and you can pluck off ticks. They absolutely swarm to it. It's possibly the easiest collection method there is. Um, People were asked to collect in July because that's for us peak nymph season. The nymphs are a really important life stage. They're also where a ton of mortality takes place. So the nymph population usually gets used as a metric for tick counts in general. And this active management really is pretty common. I've used it in every single survey I've done, either in this or for other projects. You can see in the bottom left-hand corner the kind of sizes we were dealing with. The dog ticks are to the right, the black-legged ticks are to the left. And the nymphs for the black-legged ticks, which we were interested in for their diseases, are those is that one tiny pinprick to the left of the two black-legged ticks. They're hard to spot, and it starts to really give you a good understanding of why people can get bit by them and not notice. I mean, that that's a person's thumb next to it. They're barely the size of a poppy seed, and if you have that caught on your leg or on your ankle, there's a pretty good chance that you're not going to notice it. And, you know, I will say, our volunteers really didn't let us down. We collected over 1,000 dog ticks the first year and nearly 1,000 black-legged ticks. And the second year, they absolutely blew us out of the water, almost 3,000 dog ticks. We had huge numbers, and it was kind of amazing to see. It gave us a really good idea of where ticks were really abundant, how they were acting, what plants they were around, what forest types they were in. It really gave us an excellent understanding of their population and where they like to hang out. It also gave us an idea on the kinds of things that people were mistaking for ticks. This project is about public safety, and seeing people mistake certain insects for ticks was just as important for us as seeing people correctly collect ticks. Going through, we found that we collected almost 900 non-tick specimens between the 2 years. I'm not blaming anyone for this. As you can see in this sort of circle on the right, there were a ton of just little black dots at some point, and at some point you just are gonna collect the wrong thing. And this thing on the right it's a little petri dish, and this is basically how we sorted them, just by hand, left and right. We divided them up by sex for certain research purposes and for disease testing. And those non-ticks that we collected, they were mostly mites, which if you look at this picture on the left, I really don't blame anyone. They're a little bit different in body shape, but they do very much look like ticks. I was a little upset to see that a huge amount of what we collected were spiders, which is unfortunate. Our local spiders are a huge help to us, but I understand it's got 8 legs, it's crawling. You just grab it, you toss it in, you try not to think about it. And the other insect I was a little worried about was we collected a decent amount of beetles, which were almost entirely weevils, who are this very fun, very charismatic type of beetle that, especially on the internet, has gotten a lot of love recently. But it does have this long snout. And I think that sort of told us something, is that everything that was being mistaken for a tick was either a mite, which basically just looks like a tick if you inflated it a little bit, a spider, which has 8 legs and can be the right size, or a weevil, which is a type of beetle with a large proboscis. The mistakes people were making were insects that kind of looked like ticks, which gave us a good feeling that people were collecting things that at least looked like ticks, and that our ability to teach people how to identify ticks was pretty effective, even if people were getting a few things that weren't exactly ticks. It also tells us that if we were getting this much extra, we probably weren't missing that many ticks. And out of the ticks we collected, we were able to get um, over 250 properties sampled, including 13 land trusts, which are super important because those are usually managed and they usually get a lot of hikers. And pretty much everyone who started the process finished the process, which I cannot tell you how wonderful that makes me feel. There's nothing worse than seeing someone, agree and start something with you and then just completely drop the ball on it. So seeing how many started the process with us and completely followed through with it, I have so much gratitude for all of our volunteers. As far as pathogens are concerned, we were collecting pathogens all over the state. We found a lot more in Lincoln, Knox, and York than anywhere else. That's not necessarily all that surprising. Those are places that a lot of people live, that see a lot of tourist movement, but pretty much everywhere uh, had a decent amount of hits for all of these diseases. And we sided, um, sorry, we didn't side with, we looked at timber harvesting. Now, you can ignore the A's and B's for this graph, they're not relevant. Um, but what we found is that when we were comparing timber harvesting to the ticks we were collecting at Fry Mountain and other forest sites, we found that sites that had been cut really recently had the least ticks, and sites that had never been cut were having the most ticks. This sort of told us that logging definitely has an effect on the tick population, and it told us that maybe it gave us some ideas about what can be changed in an area to help reduce the tick population. The invasive plants we had everyone searching for also gave us some interesting data to work with. It's something we're still working with and hasn't been settled on yet, but it seems like invasive plants on your property can increase the amount of ticks on your property. The biggest species that we saw were barberry and honeysuckle, though right now we're also looking at um, buckthorn as another possible one of these invasive plants that a lot of people end up having on their property, especially if you have a woody section on your property that can increase the amount of ticks on your property. We're not exactly sure why at this point. It's still something we're looking into, but just knowing that this connection is here is a really easy step to try and help people reduce the amount of ticks on their property. And that's really the whole part of the study. We had great volunteers. We found that timber harvesting reduces ticks in an area. We found that invasive plants could increase it. And we found that, sometimes people are a little jumpy, that when they see anything that sort of looks like a tick, they'll grab it and toss it in, which all of those in our minds are pretty good things to see. They're a great springboard for our future research, and they help us understand some management practices that people can do at their own home. Now, especially because of forestry, it helped us understand that ticks are really searching for areas that are humid, that have dense undergrowth. They're really looking for places that deer and mice would love to live. They love leaf piles, they love brush piles. I've been asked a bunch of times whenever I'm at somebody's house, they'll complain that they're just infested with ticks. And I'll just be able to look over and there'll be like a 3 foot high brush pile on their lawn covered in leaves and sticks. And it's really easy to just look over and be like, point to it and say, that's probably the issue, is that you're bringing in the things that ticks like to feed on. Another issue is bird feeders. Um, I think it's a pretty common issue that people have is that deer will come and eat the spillover from your bird feeder, and mice obviously will also come and munch on that spillover. And that's another huge way that ticks wander their way onto your property. So we found a few ways to help people kind of encourage their property to become tick-free. The best ones are evergreen trees. They don't drop any leaves. You can't have a leaf pile if the only thing in your yard is needles. Getting rid of invasive plants, getting rid of sticks, getting rid of uh, any log piles, making sure that any stone walls on your property don't have mice in them, finding ways to keep deer off your property, whether that's with a fence or just removing any food that might be on the ground that they care about. And we found that mulch isn't a particularly good tick habitat. So putting mulch around your property can help reduce ticks, or at least help reduce them from spreading around your property. And it's not just about your property, it's also about you. We were really depressed whenever we talked to volunteers because a lot of them just didn't seem to have any idea how to protect themselves from ticks. And the steps are really simple: light colored clothing, long sleeves, insect repellent, pants tucked into your socks. It's really simple stuff. It takes 5 minutes. I know the socks thing is uncomfortable. I've spent 4 summers at this point doing this. It is not great, but it is one of the easiest methods to not get bit. And if you really don't like putting your pants into your socks, tick gaiters, $30 on Amazon. Excellent solution, excellent alternative to the socks thing, excellent like extra layer of protection for the socks. Either way, it's a really simple solution. There's also several insect repellents. There's, it hasn't been, I wouldn't call it proven, but there's good evidence at this point that any insect repellent is somewhat of a way of reducing ticks. They just don't cling to you as well. They stay away from you if you have insect repellent. Though there are some insect repellents on the market that are specifically focused on keeping ticks off of you and preventing tick bites. And if you get bit by a tick, one of the first things you should do is we have on the Humane website, we have links to tick testing options. It's $15 and you can just perfect peace of mind know either, yep, it had Lyme disease, or no, it didn't. If you're feeling symptoms, it can help your doctor identify it. It's a really huge help if you're worried about a tick bite to be able to get it tested. And um, the Maine CDC also does vector-borne disease information They also do their own research, but they're a huge resource on different ticks, the diseases they carry, where you can find them, and sort of up-to-date information on the tick populations in Maine. And with that, I'm happy to answer questions to anyone who has them.
Thank you, Michael. That was so informative. Hmm.
Are y'all done?
So if anyone has any questions, feel free to type them into the chat box.
Thanks, Michael. That was great. I learned a lot. While we're waiting to see if we have any questions typed in the box, I had a couple questions for you.
Yeah.
I've heard from various farmers and from my own experience with having chickens that like chickens, ducks, guinea fowl can reduce the amount of ticks that you have in a field or in your yard. Do you think that this is true? And if so, like, is there an optimal species of bird to have, or like an amount that you think actually helps make a difference?
So this is always a rough one because, and I'm not uh, any kind of, I don't have any fowl, so I can't speak to it very well. All of them will eat ticks. I've seen they really do love to eat them, and I'm sure having them on your property can reduce it. But on the other hand, their food and bedding attracts mice a lot of the time, and mice will end up carrying ticks to your property. So it's kind of a double-edged sword situation. They'll help, but the mice will hurt your tick population issue. If you can keep mice out of the feed and the bedding, it'll probably help, but it's just sort of a trade-off. There's no real perfect way of doing it.
Thank you.
Okay, so we are getting some Q&As flowing in. Says it looks like the chat is disabled. Okay, so then instead of trying to use the chat, use the Q&A button towards the bottom of your screen. So first question, can you fence off an area to keep deer out and expect lower level of ticks inside the fence?
Um, it has been done. I've never done it personally, but there are guides online that I've seen. Humane Extension, I think, has also done some presentations on it, where if you previously had deer on your property and you fence it off and you can keep the deer out, it should lower the amount of ticks inside of the fence. Yeah.
So the next question is, does mowing grass help?
That's a good one, and um, not really. It will help with the dog ticks, but the black-legged ticks, the one that carry Lyme disease, they don't really like grassy areas anyway. They really love that sort of leaf pile, dead fall leaves on the ground, that kind of perfect October photo shoot kind of look. And mowing the grass, unless you're mowing over the leaves and getting rid of them that way, won't really help with that. They just don't like grass that much. They are really more into like brush and leaves.
It's a fascinating thing because we hear to leave the leaves to protect overwintering creatures, but then it's like clean up the leaves so that the wrong creatures don't get in there. So it
Well,
is an
this is
interesting dance.
Yeah, well, that's sort of part of the dance is that you do leave the leaves to protect your overwintering creatures, but a lot of those creatures have ticks on them. So it's just, I mean, I guess it's sort of a personal decision. You just have to understand that if there's more creatures on your property, there could be more ticks.
Yeah, yeah, I could see that. And also the size of property, like I'm on 5 acres. And so of course there's a lot that isn't touched. So it would
Yeah.
feel good to spend more time protecting what's a little closer, the areas where I'm outside with my dog the most and stuff. Um, okay. Andrew Rosenthal. This is his question. I don't tuck my pants in my socks as it encourages the ticks to crawl to my head where I will never find them. I feel that I have a much better chance if they bite my legs. Thoughts?
I mean, like, I I guess ticks are pretty dang lazy. Is my only thing is that they're pretty slow and they're pretty dang lazy. And I've definitely found more on my legs than I've ever found on my head. If you're worried about them crawling up, my recommendation is to tuck your pants into your socks. And then what you do is, I don't have a way to like do this with my hands, so this is going to be hard to explain, but you're going to get three pieces of duct tape. You're going to get one piece around your leg that has the sticky side out, and then a piece on the bottom and a piece on the top to stick it to your leg. That way, you essentially have like a sticky piece of duct tape facing out all the way around your ankle. They'll climb up your boot, they'll climb over your sock, climb up your pants, and get stuck on the tape. I've tried it. It doesn't always work if you're in like a field that has a lot of grass seeds or something like that. It'll get gummed up with grass seed. But that's a method that I've used a lot, especially when we're doing really long days of dragging. And I know dang well that that works. I've done full field work days and just you'll look down and there'll be 10 or 20 of them just stuck in the tape. So that's honestly my best recommendation is if you're worried about them crawling all the way up you, that's really a surefire way to stop that. You can also do that on your arms too if you're bending down and doing gardening work.
Clever.
That's really cool. So the next question from Linda is, what is the difference of looks like mulch versus ground up leaves put down as mulch?
Um, I don't really know if there's too much of a difference. The real idea behind it is trying to create like a rough area that for a tick is really hard to move over, sort of a gravel-like texture, because then they have to go up and down and up and down. Grinding up your leaves and putting it down as mulch might be able to accomplish that, and those leaves will probably be too small for things like mice to hide in. So that could work. I don't have that much experience, and I don't know if there's any information comparing the two, but any way of just getting rid of full-sized leaves on your property should be a help.
Do ticks wash off when taking a shower?
Um, in my experience, no, they'll stick to you pretty good. You really have to once you go outside, just do a full look all around your body. And I know some people will say to burn them off. We don't recommend that because if you freak them out too much, they will vomit blood back into you. And if they have an infection, you're more likely to get it if you burn them or poke them too much or try and pull them off with your fingers. The best method is just the old-fashioned pair of tweezers, as close to your skin as possible. Grab, twist a little bit, pull. Sorry, I know that's a little gross, but
It is. It's okay. It's good to know these things.
it's
It
a
is.
gross
It's really
subject.
good to know these things. I appreciate your level of presence and devotion to learning this so that we can all respond better. Maren, do you want to do the next question?
Yeah, sure.
They are rolling in.
They are rolling.
Everyone's curious.
Sorry about that. Yeah. The next question is, do chipmunks and squirrels carry ticks?
Yes, they're the major host for the uh larval stage of tick, which are I guess you'd call it like the baby form. It's when they're too small to bite us or deer or any larger mammal. They really, really require mice and chipmunks. There's been a few other studies, not this one that I was involved with, but a lot of other students at UMaine have done a lot of work trapping mice and chipmunks and counting the larval ticks on them, especially around the ears, to try and determine tick density in other situations. So yeah, they're a huge carrier. They're a really important part of the tick's life stage.
Some people think Japanese bamboo reduces ticks. True or false?
I'm gonna be honest, I've never heard that one. Um, yeah, I no comment. I have no idea.
The next question from Nick is, do any other insects carry Lyme disease, and what makes it so prevalent in ticks?
Um, I haven't heard of any other insects that carry Lyme disease. It's really so prevalent in ticks because ticks are really good at they deal with a lot of different mammals, and all of those mammals can host Lyme disease, and all of those mammals like to wander around where we wander. So it becomes a really bad combination of just they bite deer. Deer can sort of, I guess, have a lot more disease inside them before they get sick. So then more ticks are able to bite deer. All of them will get infected. All of them will drop off. And then there'll be a huge amount of infected ticks all over the woods.
And the last question we have here, can ticks climb up wellies or are they too slick? Are any
Um,
fabrics too slick for ticks to cling to?
um, I don't know that I've had any that are reliably too slick. I had a couple lab techs this summer who were in rubber boots because we were in wet areas and they were still finding ticks on them. The other thing is that ticks don't have one height that they prefer, especially the black-legged ticks. They like brush anywhere from like foot boot height all the way to around knee height is as tall as they really want to go. So even if there was some kind of boot that they'd slide off of, they still might attach to pants. I wear synthetic pants and they still climb up me, and those are pretty slippery. So I haven't found any sort of clothing that is tick resistant. I'm sure that fluffier stuff probably they have an easier time clinging on to, but there's no surefire anti-tick cloth.
Um, so that's all the questions in the Q&A, but I just wanted to ask you, Michael, if anyone that's listening wanted to be involved in volunteering or learning more in this about this project going forward, are you going to be doing, is this project ongoing every year? Are you going to be doing it again?
No, for right now, this project is closed, so it's done for now. You can check out UMaine or UMaine Extension. Usually, our website or the extension's website will post any ongoing projects. Um, yeah, I think that's the two easiest places to get involved. Otherwise, sometimes, um, sorry, I'm trying to think of like all the places and whether they like do anything publicly. Sometimes, um, Department of Agriculture will have outreach stuff that they'll also let people get involved in. But yeah, I think those are the three places where we usually advertise. Otherwise, check Facebook. We usually throw stuff on Facebook. If you try and follow UMaine or UMaine Extension on Facebook, that's where a lot of the stuff gets posted. It's just all the social medias, all that basic stuff.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for being with us this evening, Michael.
Probably.
Yeah, thank you so much, Michael. And thanks to everyone else for being here. And thanks to Noel, too, for helping with hosting. And
Mhm.
yeah, we'll be doing a webinar each month. So if you guys are interested, then feel free to tune back in for those.
Yeah, and best of luck to you, Michael, in your continued research.
All right. You guys have a good night.
You too. Thank you.
Bye.